The CEO of a large restaurant chain was a man who lived a life of comfort and success. To the world, he was a millionaire with everything he could ever want: wealth, power, and respect. But deep inside, he had always believed that true leadership was not about sitting in a big office with glass windows. For him, it was about understanding the lives of the people who worked for him. He wanted to know their struggles, their sacrifices, and their dedication. And the only way to truly learn this was to step into their shoes, even if just for a short while. One evening, after months of planning, he made a bold decision. He would go undercover as an ordinary customer in one of his restaurants. Not just any branch, but one of the busiest and most overlooked ones, a place where managers often struggled to keep things running smoothly. He dressed simply, in a plain shirt and old jeans, and left behind his expensive watch and polished shoes. Without his usual appearance of authority, he looked just like another tired man stopping in for a meal. When he walked in, the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. Families filled the tables, children laughed as they played with straws and napkins, and couples leaned across booths whispering to each other. The smell of fresh fries and grilled burgers filled the air. The CEO, now disguised, quietly slid into a booth in the back corner where he could observe without drawing attention. As soon as he sat down, he noticed a young waitress moving quickly from one table to another. She wore the standard uniform: black pants, white shirt, and a small apron tied tightly around her waist. Her hair was neatly tied back, though a few strands had escaped and fell across her tired face. She balanced a tray full of drinks in one hand while scribbling down another order with the other. What caught his attention was not just her speed, but the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. Her smile appeared genuine, but there was a faint heaviness in her eyes, as if she hadn't rested properly in days. The CEO watched as she hurried to the kitchen, returned with plates, and then rushed to clean up a table that had just been vacated. When she finally reached his booth, she greeted him warmly. "Good evening, sir. Welcome. Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" Her voice was polite, soft, and full of effort. He smiled back and ordered a simple coffee, deciding he would stay long enough to see how things unfolded. Throughout the evening, he continued watching. The restaurant was understaffed that night. He noticed that while other employees often disappeared into the back or moved slowly, this new waitress never seemed to stop. She carried heavy trays, bent down to clean spills, and even helped an older man by holding the door open for him as he left. Her kindness seemed natural, not forced. Yet every time she passed his booth, he noticed how her shoulders slumped a little more, as though the weight of her own world pressed down on her. The CEO realized she was not like the others. While some staff tried to do the minimum, she gave everything she had. But something about her behavior puzzled him. There was a sense of urgency in the way she worked, almost as if she was racing against time. She wasn't just earning money, she was surviving. Hours passed, and the restaurant slowly began to empty. Families left with their children, couples paid their bills, and the noise softened into a gentle hum. By now, the waitress had been working non-stop for several hours. The CEO, still seated quietly, could feel her fatigue just by watching her. Finally, closing time arrived. The lights were dimmed, chairs were stacked, and the last customers made their way out. The other staff members signed off quickly, laughing as they put on their jackets and headed home. But the young waitress remained behind, wiping the last of the tables with slow, careful strokes. Her co-workers didn't seem to notice her struggle, or perhaps they were too busy with their own lives. The CEO thought she would leave soon as well, but what happened next surprised him deeply. Instead of walking toward the door, she quietly slid into one of the booths near the corner. She tucked her apron beside her, leaned her head on the table, and within minutes, her eyes closed. She had fallen asleep right there, in the same place where she had served customers all evening. The sight stunned him. Why would a young waitress choose to sleep in a restaurant booth after work? Didn't she have a home to return to? Was she too exhausted to even walk back, or was there no place waiting for her? Questions raced through his mind, but the only thing he knew for sure was that this wasn't normal. Something was terribly wrong. He sat still for a while, not wanting to disturb her. Her breathing was soft and steady, her hands curled slightly under her face like a child resting after a long day. There was no blanket, no pillow, nothing to make her comfortable, just the cold surface of the booth. The CEO's heart grew heavy. This was more than just tiredness. This was a hidden struggle unfolding before his eyes. At that moment, the millionaire inside him faded, and the human side took over. He wasn't just a businessman anymore, he was a witness to someone's silent battle. A waitress who had spent hours making sure strangers had their meals, who had smiled through exhaustion, was now left with nothing but a wooden table to rest on. The CEO made a silent promise to himself. He would find out her story. He would learn why she had nowhere to go, and he would help. But he also knew he couldn't reveal himself just yet. If he walked up and told her who he really was, she might feel embarrassed or even refuse his kindness. He needed to wait, to watch carefully, and to earn her trust. As he finally left the restaurant that night, the image of her sleeping in the booth stayed with him. The millionaire, who had seen luxury in every corner of the world, had never seen something so simple yet so powerful. It wasn't just the picture of a tired worker, it was the reflection of courage, sacrifice, and silent pain. He knew this undercover mission would change everything. Not just for him, but for her as well. And so, the first part of his journey began not as a CEO with money and power, but as a quiet observer who had stumbled upon a story that would soon touch his heart in ways he had never expected. The next evening, the CEO returned to the restaurant. He carried the same simple look: plain shirt, worn-out jeans, and shoes that didn't reveal anything about his wealth. He wanted to see if what he had witnessed the night before was just a moment of exhaustion or if it was something deeper. When he stepped inside, the restaurant was once again alive with voices and laughter. Customers filled the booths, children waved their hands for attention, and the kitchen bell kept ringing as orders were called out. Amidst all this chaos, his eyes searched for her, the young waitress who had fallen asleep in the booth. He didn't have to look far. There she was, moving quickly between tables, balancing plates on her arms, and offering polite smiles to each customer she served. Just like the night before, she looked tired, but her effort never slowed down. She poured water for one table, delivered food to another, and still found time to kneel down when a little child dropped a toy under the booth. The CEO couldn't help but admire her strength. This time, he decided to sit closer, at a booth near the center of the restaurant. He wanted to see more clearly how she managed everything. As she walked by, she recognized him from the night before and smiled politely. "Back again, sir. Would you like the same coffee as yesterday?" she asked softly. "Yes, please," he replied, pretending to be just another regular customer. As she walked away, he noticed the slight drag in her steps, the heaviness in her shoulders. She returned quickly with the coffee and a warm smile, but her eyes told a different story. They carried a quiet fatigue, the kind that no amount of sleep could fully cure. Throughout the evening, he kept watching. The restaurant was short on staff again. Some workers disappeared for long breaks, others moved lazily, but she continued rushing from one task to another. She didn't complain, didn't sigh loudly, didn't even stop to rest. It was as if she had accepted this pace as normal. But what struck him most was how invisible she seemed to everyone else. The customers enjoyed their meals and left tips without noticing the strain on her face. The other employees joked among themselves, never offering her a hand. Even the manager walked past her without much acknowledgement. She was working harder than everyone, yet it felt like no one truly saw her. The CEO, however, couldn't look away. He had spent years building his company, creating training programs, and writing values about respect and teamwork. Yet here he was, sitting in his own restaurant, watching one of his employees struggle in silence. Hours passed, and slowly, the tables emptied. The families went home, the laughter faded, and the soft hum of closing time filled the air. The CEO pretended to stay longer, taking small sips of his coffee as if he had nowhere else to be. He wanted to see what would happen after everyone left. As expected, the young waitress stayed behind again. She wiped down the tables with careful hands, swept the floor, and stacked chairs one by one. The other workers clocked out and hurried away, leaving her alone once more. The manager gave her a brief nod before locking the office door, but there was no real concern in his eyes. The CEO's heart grew heavier as he watched her. After finishing her tasks, she walked slowly to a booth in the corner, the same one she had chosen the night before. She set down her apron, sat down, and leaned forward onto the table. Within minutes, she closed her eyes. Her breathing became steady, her shoulders relaxed, and once again, she was asleep in the restaurant. This time, the CEO's curiosity turned into worry. It wasn't just exhaustion. This was a pattern. She was using the restaurant as her shelter, a place to rest when the world outside offered her none. He could no longer dismiss it as a one-time moment of tiredness. There was a deeper story hidden behind her silence. He sat there, torn between waking her up and leaving her undisturbed. In the end, he chose to remain quiet. He slipped out of his booth, paid the bill at the counter, and walked slowly out the door. But as he stepped into the night air, the image of her resting in that booth clung to him. On his way home, he couldn't stop thinking. Why was she sleeping there? Did she not have a place of her own? Was she in some kind of trouble? Or was she simply too poor to afford housing? The possibilities troubled him. He had seen employees struggle before, but rarely had he seen someone hide their pain so carefully. That night, the millionaire lay awake in his luxurious bed, yet his thoughts were not on his wealth or his success. They were on the young waitress, asleep in a booth she had just cleaned for others. He felt a sense of guilt rising in him. Here he was, the owner of the company, living a life of comfort, while one of his own workers was quietly fighting battles he had never even noticed. The next morning, he made up his mind. He would not ignore this. If he truly believed in leading with compassion, then he had to know her story. He had to understand why she was living like this. And once he knew, he had to help. The following day, he returned again, determined to learn more. But this time, his heart was heavier, his eyes sharper, and his mission clearer. He was no longer just an undercover CEO testing his staff. He was a man on a journey to uncover the truth behind the silent struggles of someone who deserved far more than the world had given her. And deep inside, he knew what he was about to discover would change not just her life, but his as well. The CEO returned to the restaurant with a stronger purpose in his heart. He was no longer simply observing, he wanted to understand the truth behind the young waitress's struggles. He had watched her fall asleep in the booth 2 nights in a row, and the image stayed with him wherever he went. He couldn't let it go. He felt it was no longer just about his company or his business, it was about humanity, about a person who needed to be seen and heard. That evening, when he walked inside, she was already busy, rushing from one table to another. She carried trays of drinks, picked up empty plates, and bent down to talk kindly to a child who spilled his soda. Her smile never faded, though her eyes still carried the same quiet sadness. The CEO sat down at a table not far from her section. He decided tonight would be different. Tonight, he would try to talk to her, not as a boss, not as a rich man, but as an ordinary person who cared. When she came over to take his order, he smiled at her and said gently, "You seem very hard-working. Do you always take on so many tables?" She gave a small laugh, though it sounded tired. Yes, sir. We're short on staff most nights. I don't mind, it keeps me busy. Doesn't it wear you out? He asked, sipping his water slowly, his eyes watching her carefully. She shrugged. It does, but that's okay. I need the hours. I'll be fine. She gave him a polite nod and hurried away before he could ask more. The CEO realized she wasn't the kind of person who easily shared her problems. She carried herself with dignity, even when life was heavy. But he also noticed how carefully she chose her words, never complaining, never asking for sympathy. It was as if she had trained herself to hide the weight of her struggles. Throughout the evening, he found small ways to speak with her. Each time she came to refill his coffee or clear a plate, he asked gentle questions. At first, she gave short answers. But slowly, as the night went on, she began to open up, just a little. He learned that she had only recently started working at the restaurant. She had moved to the city not long ago, hoping to build a better future. She worked double shifts whenever she could, not because she loved working long hours, but because she couldn't afford to slow down. The CEO listened carefully, never interrupting. He nodded, offering small words of encouragement, letting her feel safe to speak. Then she said something that struck him deeply. Sometimes it feels like I'm running a race where the finish line keeps moving farther away. But I can't stop. If I stop, everything will fall apart. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her entire life. He could tell there was more she wasn't saying. He wanted to ask if she had a place to live, but he held back, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. Instead, he allowed her to share at her own pace. Later that night, when the restaurant grew quieter, she returned to his table with his bill. She smiled, but her eyes looked softer now, almost vulnerable. Perhaps it was the long day, or perhaps it was because she felt safe talking to someone who actually listened. You remind me of someone, she said suddenly. Who? The CEO asked with genuine curiosity. My father, she replied quietly. He used to listen without judging. I lost him a few years ago. Since then, it's just been me trying to figure things out. The CEO's heart ached. He realized she wasn't just tired from work, she was carrying loneliness too. No family nearby, no one to lean on, just herself against the world. After the restaurant closed, just as before, she stayed behind to clean. And just like the last two nights, when the tasks were finished, she slid into the same booth. She placed her apron beside her, leaned forward, and slowly drifted into sleep. The CEO sat there, pretending to finish his coffee, watching silently. It confirmed what he had feared, she had nowhere else to go. This booth wasn't just a quick rest spot, it was her shelter. He left quietly once again, his mind full of thoughts. On his drive home, he reflected on everything he had learned. Here was a young woman who had lost her family, who was fighting to survive, who gave her all at work, and yet had nothing waiting for her at the end of the day. For a man who owned a chain of restaurants, who could buy anything he wanted, the realization was humbling. He felt ashamed that his own employees could be suffering like this while he lived in comfort. But at the same time, he felt a deep sense of respect for her. She was not bitter, not angry, not broken. She carried her pain with grace and kept giving kindness to others. The CEO decided that night that he would not remain silent. But before he revealed himself or offered help, he wanted to understand her completely. He wanted to see her true character, not just in how she worked, but in how she lived. Over the next few days, he continued visiting the restaurant, sometimes ordering just a coffee, other times a small meal. Each visit, he found a way to talk to her, to listen to her small pieces of truth. Slowly, he pieced together her story. She had been living with a friend when she first moved to the city, but when her friend left suddenly, she had nowhere to stay. Renting an apartment was too expensive on her small paycheck, and she refused to go to a shelter because she feared it wasn't safe. So instead, she chose the one place she trusted, the restaurant where she worked. At first, she tried to hide it by leaving and wandering around at night, but soon exhaustion forced her to rest in the booth after closing. She told no one, not even the manager, afraid that if they found out, she might lose her job. The CEO listened to all of this with a heavy heart. Each detail deepened his respect for her strength but also his determination to help. He realized she wasn't just an employee, she was a symbol of everything his company should stand for: hard work, perseverance, and dignity. And though she didn't know it yet, her life was about to change. Because the man who sat across from her each night was not just a kind customer, he was the millionaire CEO of the very company she worked for. He had gone undercover to test his business, but instead, he had discovered something far more powerful, a story of resilience that would inspire him forever. The undercover CEO kept returning to the restaurant night after night. By now, the waitress had grown used to seeing him. She even greeted him with a small smile when he walked in, calling him her regular customer. She didn't know who he really was, of course. To her, he was just a kind man who liked coffee and asked gentle questions. But to him, she was no longer just another employee. She had become a window into the reality of life he had almost forgotten. That evening, the restaurant was unusually busy. A large family with 3 small children came in, filling one of the corner booths. A group of college students laughed loudly at another table, asking for endless refills. A couple sat across from each other, arguing quietly about something personal, their voices tense. The waitress moved quickly between all of them, balancing trays, remembering orders, and keeping her voice calm even when the customers were impatient. The CEO, sitting in his usual spot, watched carefully. He wasn't just looking at how hard she worked, he wanted to see how she treated people, even under stress. He noticed how she bent down to the children's level, speaking kindly to them as she handed them straws and extra napkins. She didn't roll her eyes or rush them the way some waiters might. Instead, she treated them as if they were the most important guests in the room. The parents, who looked tired, seemed grateful for her patience. At the college students' table, things were not so easy. They were playful, almost careless, and they kept teasing her by changing their orders. When she brought out the wrong soda because they had changed their minds halfway through, they laughed loudly. Most waiters would have grown frustrated, but she simply smiled, apologized, and brought back the right drinks without complaint. The CEO noticed the way she never let embarrassment or irritation show on her face. Later, when the couple's quiet argument turned louder, the woman snapped at the waitress, claiming her food was cold. It was clear the problem wasn't really the meal but the tension between the two. Still, the young waitress didn't defend herself or act offended. She gently apologized, offered to replace the dish, and even spoke softly, as if trying to calm the storm at the table. The CEO sat back, deeply moved. He realized she was not just doing her job, she was carrying a sense of kindness and responsibility far beyond what was expected of her. She gave respect even when she didn't receive it in return. She showed patience when others showed none. It wasn't weakness, it was strength. Later that night, the restaurant grew quieter again. The rush ended, and only a few tables remained. The CEO decided to test something in his own way. When she came to check on his coffee, he said, "You've had a rough evening, haven't you?" She gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "Not rough, just busy. I'd rather stay busy than sit around doing nothing. It helps me forget how tired I am." Her answer struck him. She wasn't looking for pity. She was simply choosing to focus on the positive, even when her life was filled with hardship. As the last customers left, something unexpected happened. One of the younger employees dropped a tray of dishes near the kitchen entrance. The loud crash made everyone look up. The boy looked embarrassed and muttered under his breath, expecting the manager to scold him. But before anyone else reacted, the waitress hurried over. She knelt down beside him, helping him pick up the broken pieces. "Don't worry," she whispered, smiling gently. "It happens to everyone. Just be careful with your hands." The CEO watched closely. She wasn't just kind to customers, she was kind to her co-workers too. She didn't care about blame or mistakes, she cared about people. A little later, she noticed one of the older waitresses struggling to carry a heavy tray. Without hesitation, she rushed over and offered to take half of it. The older woman sighed with relief, thanking her softly. Again, the young waitress never complained, never asked for credit. She just stepped in where she was needed, almost invisible in her goodness. The CEO realized he was learning more about her character than he had ever expected. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about who she truly was inside. Even with her own life in pieces, she still found ways to lift others up. When the shift finally ended and the restaurant emptied out, the routine repeated itself. The waitress stayed behind, cleaning carefully, making sure everything was spotless. Then, when the lights dimmed, she walked to the same booth, laid down her apron, and rested her head on her arms. The CEO sat there longer than usual that night, staring at her as she drifted into sleep. He felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for her struggles, admiration for her strength, and determination to change her life. He thought about all the leaders he knew, men and women who believed power came from titles, money, and control. But here was a young woman with no wealth, no authority, no home, and yet, in her patience, kindness, and resilience, she showed more strength than many of them ever would. Driving home that night, the CEO made another promise to himself. He would not only help her, he would also use her story to remind his company, and himself, what true values really meant. Success was not just about profits. It was about people like her who carried invisible battles and still gave their best every day. As the city lights blurred past his car window, he knew he was nearing the most important decision of his undercover mission. The time was coming to reveal who he really was. But before he did, he wanted to be sure that when he finally spoke to her, she would understand that his offer of help came not from pity but from genuine respect. And so, he prepared himself for the moment that would change both of their lives. The CEO knew the time had come. After nights of watching quietly, listening carefully, and understanding her silent struggles, he could no longer remain in disguise. He had seen enough to know her strength, her dignity, and her kindness. Now, he wanted to step out of the shadows and bring light into her life. That evening, he arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The place was still filling up, the kitchen alive with noise, and the staff hurrying to prepare for the rush. He sat in his usual booth, but this time, he felt a nervous energy within himself. For years, he had made countless business deals, spoken in boardrooms, and stood before thousands of employees without fear. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't speaking as a CEO to his staff. He was speaking as one human being to another. The young waitress noticed him and smiled politely, as she always did. "Good evening, sir. Coffee again?" she asked with her usual gentle tone. "Yes, please," he replied. But his voice carried more warmth than usual. She didn't notice, rushing off to fetch his drink, her apron swaying as she moved quickly through the crowded room. The CEO sat back and watched her as he always did, but this time he wasn't trying to uncover her story. He already knew it. Tonight, he was preparing to change it. When the evening grew late and the crowd began to thin, he asked quietly to speak with the manager. The staff looked curious, wondering why a simple customer wanted a private word. The manager, confused but polite, led him to the small office in the back. It was there that the CEO removed his disguise, not by changing his clothes, but by speaking the truth. "I'm not just a regular customer," he said calmly. I'm the CEO of this restaurant chain. The manager froze in shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He nodded quickly, unsure how to react. The CEO then gave him clear instructions. I want to call a short staff meeting tonight, after closing. Everyone must stay. No excuses. The manager hurried to obey, his face pale with surprise. When the last customers left, the staff gathered in the dining area, confused and curious. They whispered among themselves, wondering what was happening. The young waitress stood among them, tired but attentive, clutching her apron nervously. The CEO walked forward. This time, he didn't hide in the shadows. He looked at all of them and said, "Good evening. My name is not what you think. I am the CEO of this company. I came here in disguise to see how things truly work inside my restaurants. Tonight, I want to speak honestly with all of you." The room fell silent. Some employees looked shocked, others embarrassed. The manager stood stiffly, clearly nervous. But the CEO's eyes were focused on only one person, the young waitress. He continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Over the past several nights, I have watched carefully. I have seen how this restaurant runs, how customers are treated, and how staff work together. But most of all, I have seen one person who has shown more strength, kindness, and dedication than anyone could ever expect. The waitress lowered her eyes, unsure if he was speaking about her. The CEO stepped closer. "You," he said gently, pointing toward her. "You have inspired me." The room turned to look at her. She gasped softly, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. "Me," she whispered. "Yes, you," he replied firmly. "I have watched you carry this restaurant on your shoulders. I've seen you smile at customers even when you were exhausted. I've seen you show patience to people who didn't treat you kindly. I've seen you help your co-workers when they made mistakes. And when everyone else left at the end of the night, I saw you stay behind and keep working." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head, whispering, "I was just doing my job." "No," the CEO said softly, his voice filled with respect. "You were doing much more than that. You were showing true character. You were showing kindness when no one was watching. And that," he paused, "is something no company can buy with money." The staff stood in stunned silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, realizing how little they had noticed her efforts. The CEO took a deep breath and then spoke words that changed her life forever. "I also know your struggle," he said gently. "I know you've been sleeping here at night, with nowhere else to go. And I want you to know you don't have to hide anymore. You're not alone." The waitress froze, her face pale. Her secret, the one she had guarded so carefully, was now spoken aloud. She felt her heart racing, unsure if she should feel shame or relief. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. The CEO stepped closer, lowering his voice so it carried compassion, not pity. "You are not in trouble. I'm not here to take your job away. I'm here to make sure you never have to sleep in a booth again." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. He continued, "Starting today, you will receive a full housing allowance from the company. You will be given a stable place to live. In addition, you are being promoted to a higher position where your dedication can shine even more. And beyond that, we will create a program within our company to support employees who face hardships, so no one else has to go through what you've gone through in silence." The waitress covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed. The staff around her whispered in shock. The manager's face turned red, realizing how blind he had been to her struggle. Finally, she found her voice. Why me?" she whispered through tears. The CEO smiled gently. "Because you showed me what true strength looks like. You reminded me of why I started this company in the first place, not just to serve food, but to build a family where people care for each other. You taught me that. She cried openly now, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She felt valued. She felt like her hard work and silent sacrifices had finally been noticed. The staff clapped softly, then louder, until the room filled with the sound of applause. The young waitress stood trembling, caught between disbelief and gratitude. That night marked a turning point not just in her life, but in the life of the CEO and the entire company. She moved into safe housing within days, her future brighter than she had ever imagined. The CEO kept his promise, launching new programs to support struggling employees, inspired entirely by her story. And though she continued to work at the restaurant, she no longer carried the same hidden burden. She still worked hard, still smiled at customers, still helped her co-workers, but now she did it with hope in her heart, knowing that kindness and perseverance had changed her destiny. As for the CEO, he never forgot her. In board meetings and speeches, he often spoke about the young waitress who reminded me what true leadership means. And whenever he visited that restaurant, he always sat in the same booth, the one where her story began, the booth where he had first seen her asleep, unaware that her life was about to change.